All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited about this webinar as a part of the pre-legislative webinar series brought to you as a partnership between all five regional behavioral health policy boards, the Behavioral Health Association of Nevada, and the NPHA Policy and Advocacy Committee. Before we get rolling, I'm just going to go ahead and cover some quick housekeeping items. So first of all, again, this webinar is being recorded. The recordings will be made available to our partners, but I've also been able to post them on a YouTube channel I created. It's at NV Rural RBHC. That's it. That's simple. So I will go ahead and drop that in the chat as well. Um, you should be automatically muted. But if you do get a chance to talk during our Q&A at the end, please go ahead and mute yourself again, unless you're being called upon. So I do reserve the right to mute anyone who's not on mute if it's being disruptive to the flow of conversation at all. So my apologies in advance if that is the case. For those of you who have not done so yet, please enter your name, title, and agency in the chat. We like to keep track of who we have in attendance. And we'll also hold time for questions at the end of the presentation. It's up to our panelists today as to whether or not they want to take questions as we go, but we do want to try to hold that for the end if possible. When that's the case, you can go ahead and use the raise hand function on your toolbar to ask your question. It may look like a react and then there's a button below, but please go ahead and do that. There should also be a Q&A function, and you can go ahead and type your questions in there and I will read them aloud to the group. The nice thing about that is you can also ask questions anonymously if you don't feel comfortable talking, if you're a little shy. That's okay. Because our panelists today are previous legislators, I do have a couple quick notes. So rude or disrespectful comments or questions will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form. And kind of similarly, any sort of off-topic or pointed political questions will not be answered. We really are going to stick to, hey, how can we best engage with legislators here? If it's not related to that, we're not going to go into that. If you would like to reach out to these folks separately, I will leave it up to them to share their contact information if they feel comfortable doing so. I do reserve the right to remove anyone from the webinar for any reason, including rudeness. So just keep that in mind, please. Again, this is a collaborative project from the Regional Behavioral Health Policy Boards, the Behavioral Health Association of Nevada, and NPHA's Advocacy and Policy Committee led by Dr. John Packham. The purpose of this webinar series is to help our attendees really fully prepare for the legislative session that starts next week so that you have the information you need to navigate the session in the most appropriate way for your position and also for the topics that you have personal or professional interest in. We've made efforts to include speakers who are both subject matter experts, but also who don't stand to gain financially or politically from engaging in this webinar series. We do have several upcoming webinars. So tomorrow we have Reading, Understanding, and Using State Budgets for Advocacy, again from Elise Monroy-Marsala. On Monday, there is another panel. It will be the Regional Behavioral Health Policy Board chairs and their RBHCs discussing bills and their policy priorities. On Thursday next week, we have current efforts to improve Nevada's behavioral health workforce. We're going to hear from Dr. Sarah Hunt from Be Here Nevada, as well as Dr. Tara Rains from the Children's Advocacy Alliance. After that, our last week that we're doing this particular series is jam-packed. So on Monday, we have Youth Behavioral Health in Nevada, State-Level Suicide Prevention. We'll be hearing from Emma White, who is at the Nevada Office of Suicide Prevention. She's also an advocate, author, and professional speaker on the topic of youth suicide prevention, so that should be really good. On Wednesday, we have an update on Nevada's crisis response system from Rachel Isherwood, what they're doing, what their plans are, what the timelines are going to look like. Thursday, we'll have Dr. Terry Kearns from the Nevada Attorney General's Office in for a overview of the Surge 2024 annual report. And last but not least, we will have Ann Jensen, who is the Innovation Officer and Agency Manager for Nevada Medicaid, giving us an overview of the Nevada and Department of Justice agreement for children's behavioral health system transformation. So that's exciting stuff. I already mentioned the policy boards. I just want to give you a quick intro to the policy boards for those of you who are not familiar. There are currently 5 regions. They're there in that graphic. The boards themselves consist of between 7 to 13 members. They represent both local and professional perspectives. So we try to get board members who are located within the region that for the board that they'll be serving. And there's various seats that really span the spectrum of behavioral health services across the boards. The purpose of the boards are really to advise state level agencies and commissions and are allowed 1 BDR each legislative session. Membership in the board is completely volunteer, so nobody is being paid to do that. We do have the breakdown of the different regions there. Personally, I serve the rural region, which is there in blue. We've got also the Washoe region, which is in pink, and Julia has served on that board. And then also we have the Northern Behavioral Health region, which is in yellow, Southern in green, and then Clark, which includes not only Clark County, but also the southern tip of Nye, so that it includes Pahrump. Each board is staffed with a full-time coordinator. We are the unofficial staff for the boards. And so what we do is we try to align the work of the boards with whatever funding is available. We work as a liaison between state and local agencies to make sure that local agencies know what's available to them as far as state resources, and that also local agencies have a voice at the table and local communities have a voice at the table when decisions are being made. We also help state agencies connect with local organizations when they have funding that needs to go out or projects that need to be undertaken. Here are your current 4 behavioral health coordinators. The Clark position is currently vacant. And that is all I have for that before we get rolling. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and open it back up. Looks like we have a good group of people here. So ladies, are we ready to roll? Okay. So first off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a question, and then I'm going to take turns asking one of you to go first. So this first question is, can you tell us a little about your public service and how long did you serve in the legislature? And Amber, if you'd like to go first, that would be great.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this. My mission in life now is to demystify the legislative process for as many people as possible. So I'm so happy to be here. And I was just reminiscing with a friend. I used to go in 2004, I was out at Rotary Clubs doing the Legislator 101 and how to advocate. So um, I really truly this is my mission now, and I teach the legislative internship class at UNR, and that's why I look a little tired. It was match day today, and so I was up all night trying to get our interns. We have half of the legislature have UNR interns with them. So if you see any students when you're down there, say hello to them. But my service at the legislature was 2 terms, 2015 and 2017. So I served for 4 years. And I always sort of joke it's like military service is how I have to look at it. You know, I did my service, and then the next person that took over my district after me really shared my values and did a great job. So I kind of feel like, there should be a rotation like that because, I ruined my health and, took time away from my family and it was all worth it. But there is sort of a limit on what I think people can do in a citizen legislature. So as far as my time at the legislature started in 1997 in the same internship program that I'm running. I worked for Vivian Freeman. She was the Health and Human Services chair at the time. And that's really where my health policy interest started. And I went all the way to my PhD in health policy. So that was a life-changing event for me. I worked at the Legislative Council Bureau then. I then lobbied for a nonprofit for the Nevada State Medical Association. I worked in the Department of Health and Human Services as the deputy director there for programs and policy, and then ended up in the legislature. So I guess the legislature has been a part of my life for a very long time.
Awesome. Thank you, Amber. And then Julia?
Thank you. So in terms of public service, I actually started in the city council level. So I spent 8 years on the Sparks City Council from 2008 to 2016. And then spent 5 years in the Senate. That's 3 terms. And I take credit for the 4 special sessions as well during that time. I'm sure Amber served in some of those as well. Those in some ways are almost more challenging because they're not as scheduled. And then just broadening public service, most of my professional career has been in either nonprofit management at a consulting firm that did consulting organizational development work primarily for nonprofit and government organizations. And then I currently serve as the Behavioral Health Administrator for Washoe County, which is a new position that was created I really started in July of this year, that is focused on policy and systems work around behavioral health. So lots of other people in the county who are clinicians, who are running programs or providing direct services, but this role lives in the county magistrate's office, works with a team that includes Dorothy Edwards, the behavioral health coordinator for Washoe County, and the new management analyst position. So we're facilitating regional initiatives of regional behavioral health initiatives that have significance across many, many partners. So in my time during the legislature specifically, because that's what we're here for, I served 3 sessions. In 2 of those, I was the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. And in one of those, I was the Finance Committee they call them subcommittee chairs for the finance group that was focusing specifically on health and human services. And so I love the health and human services space. And it was really during my legislative service that I started working specifically on advancing issues around behavioral health.
That's wonderful. Thank you both. Okay, so our next question is, so many of our attendees have participated in other webinars to help them prepare for the upcoming legislative session. As a past legislator, what types of contact or connection with either advocates or professionals who are working to educate regarding different potential outcomes, what was the most constructive way for them to engage with you? I'm going to go to Julia first.
So it's a great question. And I think I know you've had other webinars, but I'm just going to start with the reminder that once we are in session, we are well underway. And so in a typical legislative session, there will be approximately 1,200 bills introduced. And of those, around 900 of them will get a hearing and about 600 of them will pass. Simultaneously, we are also reviewing the governor's recommended budget and going through that budget almost line item by line item over the course of the 120 days to make sure that at the end of the session, we have approved the state's budget, which doesn't get quite as much attention sometimes as the more policy bill side of the House. So by the time we are in session, our activities are primarily focused on reviewing that budget and reviewing the bills that have been brought forward and making decisions on whether they move forward or not. And so the first thing that I would say is during the session is not necessarily the best time to do broad education on the community's needs or broad education on the solutions that you would like to pull forward in our state if there's not a bill or a budget item already in place to address that. That work really is the 18 months before the session starts. And so what I will say is while almost all the legislators are super interested and want to know about the bigger picture, once we're in session, what we really need to hear about is what's your opinion on this specific bill and what's your opinion on this specific budget item. And that can be, I think, challenging for people and frustrating for people. I think they want to, we're all together in one place. Hey, you've got all 63 legislators. Let me pick them off because they're all down there in Carson City. But the reality is because of the very real deadlines and very real purpose of the session, we don't have time to talk about the things that we're actually voting on, let alone all of the other things that people would like to talk to us. So I think to be most effective during that period, that closed period that is 120 days, the thing that is most successful is to stay on point about the things that we can actually influence when we're down there. And so knowing the bills you want to talk about, knowing when those bills are coming up on a schedule, and it just gets brutal. And there's no other word for it. If you want to talk to me in February about a bill that's not scheduled to be here in March, I may not be able to make time for you for that because I need to talk to the people whose bills are coming up on Monday, Wednesdays, Tuesdays, Thursdays hearing. And so it doesn't lend itself to being responsive to the schedules of the people who want to be down there. And, I think Amber, absolutely, like so many of us wanted to have an open door and wanted to be able to talk to people all the time. But the reality of it is you have to talk about the things that you're going to be pushing the button on the very next day or that day even. So that's the thing that I would say is most important. And then it's kind of a free for all about how you can, like, obviously it's best to get a scheduled meeting. If you can get a scheduled meeting, that is fantastic. Oftentimes those meetings will get canceled because the legislative day schedule shifts. So then it is hallway conversations, it is public comment, it is the letters and the emails and the things that you can send. And we do generally, our staff helps us to make sure that we see those. But again, a letter that says, here's all the problems with access to care for behavioral health in the state of Nevada, I'm not gonna be able to spend as much time on during session. I would be looking for, here's what I think about AB 267 that you're hearing today or tomorrow. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Thank you. Amber?
Everything Julia said. No, I think she and I agree on a lot. I think I would add two things is all. I always talk about timing is everything. So exactly what she said about that. It really helps if you send an email to say, up for vote tomorrow, like so that it's urgent, and then the bill number in the subject line always, because otherwise it could just get to the end. We get thousands, literally thousands of emails a day. Email is not the best method. But the second thing that I always emphasize, once we're in session, it really does help to be part of a coalition. And what I mean by that is join up with an organization that's already down there, that already has a paid lobbyist. For example, the Nevada Public Health Association or some of the hospital associations, and find who the allies are on the bills that you care about and have meetings with them and say, oh, can I join you on your day? Can I join you on your meeting with that legislator? I have a story I'd like to tell. Can I write it up for you so you can give it to a legislator? So the coalition is really important. And the other thing about that is you're coordinated that way. And each person is adding a little something. So you're adding a personal story or you're adding what your professional experience is that coalition might really need because they have all the data and the, other things, but they may not have that personal tug at the heartstrings story that you have. So similarly, if you're going to go testify, figure out the organizations that are working on that bill and join them, and they'll be grateful to have you. As a lobbyist, as a former lobbyist, I loved having people in the field or families or people who had real stories come help the coalition. So those would be the two things I would add. But as far as meetings, definitely get a scheduled meeting if you can, but it is hallway conversation sometimes, but even better if you're part of a coalition.
Well, you guys just answered my follow-up questions to that one. So, I mean, have you heard from your colleagues? Like, do emails or meetings work better as far as their favorites? What have you kind of heard when you were in the building from colleague legislators?
Why don't you go ahead, Amber?
Okay, I would just say it always helps to have a one-page fact sheet. And the less words, the better. Have graphics that show the data or have a picture of a person who's affected and have it be a one-pager because the volume of information we have to read, all of those bills plus all of the background information is we're skimming. I mean, busy people have to skim. It's really that clear. So I would always make a fact sheet for whatever you care about and really think through like what are the highlights and put those at the top. And it's if you've ever learned journalism writing, right? It's the pyramid and you put the most important stuff at the top and the background at the bottom. That's how you should be communicating with legislators. And we get these very long, detailed things that people spent weeks on and we can't get through them. So, but if you have that fact sheet, at least you can go into the building and drop it off and then follow up with a phone call. And then a couple days later, follow up with an email. But, if it's urgent, stand in the hallway with your fact sheet and say, I really hope you vote yes. I really hope you vote no. And here's why. And I'm available if you need more information is always a really helpful thing to hear because that gets in a special file when I meet somebody and they're like, actually, I've been doing this for 20 years. Let me know if you have any questions. And I do call them at crazy hours sometimes. So that's all I would add to that.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I would just add a little bit there too. Like, so I want to go back and emphasize the coalition piece because the other thing that happens during the legislature is you may have read a bill when it was first introduced.
Yeah.
Maybe or maybe not that bill got drafted. And I'm not being critical of the Legislative Counsel Bureau because the folks who actually write the bills can only do what they can do with the information that is provided to them by the legislators and or other organizations that are asking for bills. But they don't always come out exactly how accomplishing the thing that they were intended to accomplish. And so often, like coming into that first hearing, there's already meaningful amendments that may or may not be addressing some of your issues. And the way you really find out about those things is again by like if I'm a legislator and I know that, and I'm very excited about the behavioral health Association of Nevada being formed because there has needed to be a coalition that works specifically on behavioral health issues. So I'm just very excited about that. And so if I know that Behan is interested in a bill and I already have a relationship there, I can send to their government affairs committee, hey, guys, just wanted to let you know that the bill that you are reading has all these amendments coming to it. Take a look at these amendments and get me your opinion. So if you have that kind of a relationship and you're doing it through a coalition, I obviously can't do that for everybody, but if I've already got the relationship going in and I know they're interested in these bills and I know that bill is going to change quite a bit, then sometimes I can help you not spend a bunch of time on a version that isn't the version that's going to end up moving forward. And so I just really go back to that working in coalition and working with your colleagues, working where there are, and we use the term lobbyists, and sometimes I think people think that's just paid lobbyists, but there's a large number of people who are registered as lobbyists who are citizen lobbyists. They're not necessarily paid to represent one industry or one client. They're there because they are, representing broadly public health or behavioral health. Dr. Packham, who was referred to earlier today, as a good example, and some of the coalitions. So really figure out who's been there, who's been doing the work, and who can help make sure that your message gets through. And then you're sort of alluding to a higher level of sophistication. Different legislatures, we're all different. It's 63 individual personalities, and you'll have 63 different individuals who have different levels of capacity to spend time with you and how they want to get the information. One thing I'll maybe point out here is that the minority, folks who are in the minority party, whatever that is at any given time, tend to have more time because they're not chairing committees. They're not being, people sometimes forget to go talk to them because they could, well, it's going to be the majority committee that has the votes. But sometimes it's those minority members of your committees. So like when I was chairing HHS, somebody might talk to one of the minority members because they were able to get in, and that minority member would bring forward to me like, hey, this group has a legitimate concern about this part of your bill. And so, you may focus some energy there because they have more time. There are some legislators that just have amazing capacity. Amber would be one of them that would just read all kinds of content, and others who have less. They just can't do it. The other thing is don't forget staff. So all of the legislators have we call them legislative assistants on the Senate side, and they can collect information. And sometimes if it's something that's critical, they can get in front of the senator or the assembly person to say, hey, this person came in, they have a real concern. With my LA, I was going through all the bills. Like she sat in on the meetings to go through all the bills. She knew as much about most of them as I did, and she could say, "Hey, this one, they have a really legitimate concern. I want you to see this before you're walking into that hearing." So don't forget the minority party. Don't forget staff, and then you got to figure out how they each like to hear the information. There's not a one size fits all answer for that question, unfortunately.
And actually, you reminded me of something, if I can jump in really quick. There is some strategy about when you see a bill, if you want to engage in it, definitely talk to the chair or their staff first. I mean, I'm sorry, not the chair, the sponsor, like the sponsor who requested it. And then next would be the committee chair who has that bill, because the bills will get sent to committee, then talk to the committee chair. But you definitely need to approach the sponsor first. Nothing is worse than a sponsor being blindsided with an amendment. And that's a good way to not be considered, right? So start with the sponsor, contact their office, say, I'm really interested in this. I have some ideas about it. I think that, and then the chair would be next. And then the vice chair. And then I agree, all the members.
That's a good point.
Thank you. So as far as if someone is interested in scheduling a meeting with a legislator, what's the best way? How do they go about doing that? I know that some people maybe have never done that before. So do they just shoot an email to the email and legislative website? Do they, what's the best way to go about that?
Every legislator has staff, and they are 100% in control of their calendars because the legislators themselves are too busy to be able to do that. So even when a legislator tells you, oh yeah, I can meet with you, make sure that the legislative staff gets it on their calendar or it won't happen. So that's the first thing. And usually I went looking the other day and it didn't look like it was published yet, but usually there's a list on the legislature for both houses of who the staff members are for each. So you can get their phone number and you can get their email. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is pay attention to the calendar. So the legislative process is governed by a series of relentless deadlines that do not allow for any flexibility. And the closer you get to a deadline day, the less available that legislator's going to be. And so start as early as you can in trying to get on that legislator's calendar, and know that if it's deadline day or day before deadline day, like that last week before the deadline when all of the committees are trying to get their last bills through so that they don't die, is a very hard time to get people. And so you have to get creative during that time frame.
That makes sense. Amber?
Well, I would just say, I tell this to my interns, but I think it's worth saying people are a little bit intimidated by the legislature, but on the first page of the legislature, it says Assembly and Senate on the left-hand side, and the phone number for every legislator is right there, and that will ring into their staff person. Please just do the old-fashioned pick up the phone and be brave and just call and say, I'd like to make an appointment, and they answer that phone all day. And if you can leave a message, they're really good about getting back to messages. So I would say phone way
Yeah.
before email. And be brave.
Agreed.
That is fantastic. So as far as we've talked a little bit about how someone can prepare for a meeting with a legislator, we talked about having a one pager. We talked about having a very clear focus with any materials. Is there anything else that someone should take into consideration when they're preparing for a meeting with a legislator?
Amber, why don't you go ahead?
I have a whole PowerPoint. No, I just taught my interns this at orientation last week. What to prepare before you meet with the legislator. I mean, definitely do research on them and know who, what their positions are on some things. I would say, see if you can figure out if they've sponsored this before. Some of our legislation takes 10 years to get passed, right? I mean, state paid kindergarten is a good example. Like, it took us 10 years to get kindergarten for all of our kids in the state. But you need to know the history of that legislation. And again, the coalition is very helpful for doing that. You need to dress up and take it seriously, be the most professional, conservative business dress that you can. To be taken seriously, you really do need to learn sort of how serious it is down there, right? And take it seriously. But I would say do as much research as you can, and then be prepared. And be prepared to answer questions. I mean, you could even do a mock debate with your friends, like be the devil's advocate. And the history of that field of legislation, that topic, is really important to know, because then you'll know why it might have died before, or what opposition group came out and killed it. And there is a research library that the legislature has that they can help you find old bills. It's all available online too, if you're tech savvy. The histories of all those bills are on there, and they have hyperlinks to past sessions as well. But I would say know what the opposition is if there's a history.
Yeah, I think the thing I want to emphasize here, not knowing our audience. So I 100% agree with everything that Amber said. And then also don't know that it's a realistic expectation for an individual who's just going to come down once and testify on a bill that's already well underway. And it kind of goes back to that coalition piece, right? So at the simplest level, if you're working with a coalition, hopefully that coalition has done a good job of having talking points. And the most important thing is everything that Amber said about, looking the part, being there, let them know who you are, why you are interested in this bill, and the top three talking points. Even if you get a 15-minute meeting, you're probably only going to get 5 or 6 minutes to talk about it, because we're always running tight. So just be really prepared to make sure you land your most important parts. And I don't want people to not come down to talk to their legislature, or legislators, or not come down to do public comment if they haven't done all of that work that Amber just described. I think what Amber is describing is you're taking that next step up, and you're more participating in a coalition, or you're leading some of these efforts. You really then need to know, like, that level of research, that level of background, that level of opposition, what that legislator wants to know. But I just don't want it to sound like it's such a, like, if I don't know everything about the background of this, then I shouldn't come down and talk to legislators at all. Not the case, but you should definitely partner then with people who are doing that level of work on the bill. So I think that's the piece that I would want to lift up there. But there's just nothing, you can't say enough how important it is to be succinct, and how we just do not have the time. You can leave me your annual report. I'm not going to read it. You can leave me your, like there's just no capacity for that kind of thing. And then the other thing that I would just remind people is no gifts. So even if it's just the smallest token, you just want to give them a pen or you just want to give them a whatever, by law, we're not allowed to accept gifts. And so then it just ends up being this very awkward, either some people just, if it's a pen, they just take them and just like, I can't keep telling people no, or we're constantly having this, I'm sorry, I can't take your pen conversation. So don't spend any time on swag or gifts or anything along those lines because we can't take them.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I didn't realize, yes, you're right, that I definitely would rather people be there, even if not fully researched on the legislative history. And a good example of that, so thank you for correcting me. A good example of that is really sometimes all we need to hear is the story of who is being affected, how they're being affected. So your personal story is really sometimes what puts a bill over in either being passed or not. And the story that I always tell is I was sponsoring a bill that was dead. I mean, we were going into committee that morning and I didn't have the votes in committee. And I had one very dedicated person from the community, and he just went person by person, found them in the hall, found every committee member, and we had the votes by the time the committee hearing happened. And he didn't have any special background. He was just telling them his personal story. And so, I mean, it works. And that's always my story for don't give up either. So somebody might tell you like, oh my gosh, it's already come out of one house, it's dead, whatever, or it's a lost cause. That was like literally 15 minutes before the committee hearing. He talked to the last person and it worked. And it went all the way through the process then without any opposition. So thank you, Julia, for correcting me.
Yeah, yeah, you bet. And I didn't mean it necessarily to be a correction because I think everything that you said is right. It's just there's a lot in the legislature that's not one size fits all. Like it depends. And so knowing enough to know where that bill is, what might be going on and how you might be able to help. And sometimes like Amber said, it's the story. It's the story that's going to put somebody over the top on something that's on the fence. It's also helpful to know, like, this one, people are pretty comfortable. It's got unanimous support. This is maybe not where we need to spend our time. And then the flip side of that is it could come out of one house completely, unanimous and get to the other house and new information emerges and it's a big battle. So don't get complacent either.
Absolutely. So you did mention that you may be scheduled for 15 minutes with a legislator. Is that the most common time frame? Is that kind of the standard? I know that sometimes a lot of people may be expecting to have a lot of time with a legislator. So what are some realistic expectations there?
Well, I can tell you, and this is not, I'm not disparaging anybody, but I can tell you that myself, and our behavioral health coordinator have been trying to get an appointment with a legislator who represents Washoe County to talk about 3 bills where I actually spoke directly with the legislator who said that they would give us the time. We could have 30 minutes. And now the reality is we can get 15. And that's because it just is the reality of the schedule. So I just be grateful for 15 if you can get it, is the reality of the timeline.
That makes a lot of sense, and that'll be super helpful. So I think my last question, is there any sort of etiquette that people need to follow that we haven't discussed already when it comes to meeting with legislators or emailing, any sort of other discussions?
Go ahead, Amber.
I mean, I think you always call someone chair. So if they're chair of a committee, you say Chair Ratti, Chair Joiner. I was only ever a vice chair, but chair, if I think that's the formality. If you're talking to the speaker, it's Speaker Yeager, Majority Leader Canizaro in the Senate. Those are the kind of the main titles. Otherwise, I noticed that on the website now they're calling themselves assembly members, but I'm not sure the individual legislators are. So when I was there, I didn't want there to be a gendered assembly women and assembly men because in most states it's not, it's representative. And so I had all my letterhead as assembly member and then it didn't catch on and now that may be catching on. So you might just notice whether they call themselves senators, obviously are gender neutral. So you'd say senator and then the last name and then assembly member and the last name or assemblywoman or assemblyman, depending on what they're using now. I mean, that's the like formal title and respectful, and I wouldn't call them by their first name unless you know them really well. Most of us aren't sticklers about it, though. I mean, if you did call me by my first name, I wouldn't probably notice or care, but there are some that do. So the respectful thing is to call them chair. And then when you're testifying, there are some protocols. So I would encourage you to watch a video of a committee meeting. They're all online. All the archives are there on the right-hand side of the website, and just watch how people testify. And you don't have to be scared about it, but just see some examples. And they do say, "Thank you, Chair so and so, for hearing me." And then, when they're talking to members, they use their last name. And you always have to state your name for the record every time you talk. So if you get asked a question and you're answering it, you state your name for the record again. And that's because literally there's somebody typing and has to put your name on the transcript. And so there are a few formalities, but it's nothing that you can't overcome by just watching a couple videos and seeing just sort of the style.
Yeah, and I would say generally that the chairs are harder on the people who are there all the time, and pretty gentle with the folks who are there for their first time or testify once a year. So even if you don't get all that right, it's probably not going to be a big deal. I think the big thing is to stay on time. So if you're testifying in a hearing and the chair says you get 2 minutes, I think where people get a little sideways is the 2 minutes is up and they keep talking. And it's not that people don't think you have something valuable to say. It's just generally that the chair is trying to get as many people in as possible in the time that is available. So I think that's part of the etiquette is, what we have to say is important, but what other people have to say is important too, and there's limited time. I can say that in the 3 sessions and 4 special sessions that I served on, there's definitely been some breakdown in the etiquette of the building itself. Like, I think when I first started, there was generally respect for even if you didn't respect the individual you were talking to, you respected the institution. And I think as some of our politics have become more divisive, I guess is the word that I will use, that by the end of my time there, I was encountering more people who were being more aggressive in the ways that they were approaching legislators, where that really, really made me want to discount what they had to say is when they were aggressive with staff. Because those staff are, they just don't deserve to have that kind of treatment. And so I think that, the things that we are talking about raise passions for good reasons, right? Some of the, I think of, people think of gun laws or abortion laws or the kinds of things that always bring out a lot of people and sometimes stir passions, but like death with dignity was another one where we're talking about assisted suicide, where people have very strong and passionate opinions. But I can tell you that elevating or, if you think that being more boisterous or more aggressive in the way that you present the information is going to get you farther, my experience is that actually that gets you tuned out. And so just be cautious about that. And outside the building is a different thing. So there's lots of opportunity to do rallies and to bring lots of people to the building and sing songs and do all the things that help, because that does influence what happens in the building. When I'll just use teachers as an example, when 500 teachers are standing outside your window and talking about how they have inadequate pay when you're going into the hearing to talk about that, then that makes a difference that that there's 500 teachers out there doing a rally. So there's space for that sort of thing, but it's never in the hearing room. It's never in the legislator's office. And particularly it's never being hard on staff. So if you get frustrated, because I've lost my temper in the legislative building. It's an intense 120 days. And so when you get to the point where that's where you are, step away and come back when you're ready to be more calm in your approach. So unfortunately, just saw more and more of that the longer I served. And I did serve. My last session was the COVID session, just to put a point on it. So frustrations were very high. The building was closed for a good portion and then was just open the last 30 days or so. Don't quote me on that. But by the time the building was open, there was some pent up frustration, and people were sharing some of that frustration when they came in the building.
Thank you. That's incredibly helpful. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. We do have a couple questions in the Q&A box. If you are interested in asking a question in real time yourself, please use the raise hand button on your toolbar. I'm going to go ahead and start with these two questions. So we have the first one from Sherilyn Rar-Wood, who is my counterpart for the Northern Board. With the new security in the building, how does the public get into the sessions?
So I don't know if there's been new security since 2021. When I was serving in 2021, there was the security. So I don't know if there's something new, but generally it is the people's building. And so all I would say is whatever security has been put in place, minus when there was a COVID pandemic and it got shut down for very different reasons. But beyond that, just leave extra time. So just make sure that you're not rushing to try to get to, like, you didn't go to lunch and you're trying to get back in the building because there are bag checks and the kinds of things that you would expect. So think of it like the airport. Make sure you leave plenty of time to get through whatever security is, and then you should be able to get into your hearing. Sometimes the reason that you can't get into a hearing is that the topic is so popular that the room fills, and the legislature does have to follow like the fire code standards and things like that. So once the room gets to capacity, oftentimes they'll try to set up a second room where people can watch it. And with the world being the way it is now, there's devices. And the other thing that came out of the pandemic was now they will do a virtual testimony that didn't exist before the pandemic. And so if you can't get into a hearing room, sometimes you can get onto the virtual lines to be able to provide your testimony.
Yeah, although they did a big renovation, I just asked last week for my interns, like, how is this going to change the building? And I was told there's no changes. So just know if you haven't been down there, it finally caught up to what the cities and counties have been doing for 20 years. When you go to a courthouse, you go through a metal detector. So there is a metal detector, but it shouldn't be too cumbersome.
Excellent. Thank you. I see Fergus has his hand raised. Fergus? Oh, my apologies. He may not be able to speak. Let me see if I can get that fixed for him. All right, Fergus, you should be able to talk now.
Good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great presentation, both of you. While we're on etiquette, if you could just, for the listeners, address the urge that some may have to approach the dais or panel at the front of the room. I've seen people get kind of chastised for that in the past, and just thought that would be something to point out.
That's a good point, Fergus. Nice to hear your voice. Yeah, you should never approach the dais. You should never go past the testimony table, basically, in the room, unless a member specifically invites you. And even if an individual member invites you, I would be making eye contact with the chair just to make sure that they know what's going on. The security environment, unfortunately, has gotten, there are just more threats. I mean, just the bottom line is there are more threats now. And so I think things that were a little bit, happened a little bit more regularly now, people are a little bit more sensitive about. So if you get invited, you can do it. If you don't get invited, don't. And even if you get invited, check with the chair.
Amber, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Nope, that's perfect. Yep.
All right. So our next question in the Q&A box is from Sherilyn. What time frame is best to send letters and advocate for support, neutral or not support? I have heard there is a window and it is short.
Go ahead, Amber.
This is where, I mean, when I consult and help people, I help, nonprofits sometimes run bills and things like that. And it's an art, not a science. I mean, it just depends is the answer. And that sucks. I'm so sorry to say that. But that is where, like, keeping in touch with bigger coalitions that have relationships with lobbyists in the building. They can get a sense from chairs about whether a bill is going to come up for a hearing even before maybe it goes public, because they've been asking the chair, please put it on your agenda. And the chair has verbally said, okay, I'll try to get to it next week or something like that. So, I mean, the window is, I have a spreadsheet where like there's every single place of where there's 5 different approvals that a bill needs to pass, all the same language by the end. And at every single place, there's a place for you to send a letter to a key person, whether it be the sponsor, whether it be the chair, and then both houses, right? That you can affect change or kill a bill or support a bill. And so it depends on where the bill is in the process and whether you can get the information. But as soon as you see, there is I should have mentioned this. There's a PLT, they call it. It's a legislative tracking system, and you can track the bills and put them on a list so that you get an email alert every time that bill is touched. And so you'll get an email alert if it shows up on an agenda. And if you see an agenda come up, I would have a letter or an email primed or a phone call ready to make. You know that it's going to be heard in 2 days, 3 days, sometimes less than that if we're near a deadline. But that's a place where then you know, okay, this is the committee member. It's a finite number of people I need to contact. It's the chair, it's the committee members. Hopefully you've already talked to the sponsor earlier. So I would say early for the sponsor, wait till the agenda is out, or that you hear a bill is going to be on an agenda soon before you approach the committee, because what Julia said earlier, they're just trying to get through the bill that's the next day.
Yeah, and I would just add to that's all perfect. Legislative time is not real time. And so if you haven't spent time in the legislative building, it seems or it feels 100% unreasonable how fast things move. And the first half of the session goes slower than the second half of the session. So there's actually almost the entire first half of the session is dedicated to that first House passage. It gives more time because if you think about it, there's more bills at the front end because they haven't died yet. And then once you get past that first House passage, those deadlines start to come very quickly. And so the answer is it might be 2 days or 3 days at the front end, but it might be 2 hours or 3 hours on a deadline day or at the back end. And this is probably a good time. We haven't really talked about the difference between the bill hearing and then the vote on the bill. And so every bill is required to be scheduled twice. And so generally how it is supposed to work is there's a bill hearing where the committee collects all the information and learns everything that they need to know about the bill. And then later it's scheduled again for an actual vote. And so during that vote, based on what they learned on the bill, there might be amendments that are brought forward or different things. Sometimes they'll have a second hearing if there's so much change to the bill that they want the opportunity to talk about it. And so I think a lot of people come down, they testify on a bill and they're expecting that bill to be voted on that day. Like I came down, I want to know how it turned out. But oftentimes that will be scheduled at another time so that the committee has the opportunity to make changes or to hear additional input now that people have heard the bill. But that all breaks down as we get close to any of the deadlines, because if the bill doesn't make it past the deadline, it dies. And so sometimes chairs, if the bill is in decent shape and it has the opportunity to be fixed, even if it isn't perfect, they'll vote it out and then they'll ask the next house to do some of the cleanup work on it just because the deadlines are so fierce. So it really could be, you might have a whole week because it's the beginning of the session and you're hearing about things a week in advance, or you might have 2 hours because it's the end of this, it's a deadline day and things are moving so quickly.
Thank you. I know we're starting to run low on time. Somebody asked anonymously if, Amber, if you can share that document where you have everything organized.
Oh, sure. Actually, it isn't mine. It's the Legislative Council Bureaus. Julia, the one I'm thinking of is the one with the arrows. It's in the legislative manual. So I can certainly, and let me see if I can find it right now for you all. But yeah, I could send it to you later. It's in like the manual that the legislators get in their trainings, but it shows every place in the process. Let me see.
Yeah, that would be wonderful if that's something that is appropriate to share. And with your permission, if I can post that on nvbh.org, which is the website for all of the regional behavioral health policy boards. We have a space just for different documents. And then we do have One more question. How would you recommend college students encourage their peers to be active in advocacy?
I'll have to give that one, Amber.
It's so interesting. I've been teaching for 20 years, right? And I've seen college students really more and more become nonpartisan, right? And I think that there's a lot of reluctance to put a label on what party they belong to. And there was a lot of crossover, like they might be really conservative on one thing and really progressive on the other. And there isn't a party that they really fit into. And so I'm getting that question a lot where like, a lot of college students, I think, are disengaging because they don't feel like the negativity or the acrimony that happens between parties really fits them. They just want to focus on saving the planet and making sure everybody has access to healthcare and solving the K-12 problem in the state. And like, I mean, they want to actually like fix the policies and not be like sucked into the partisan stuff. And so I think that's a great question. And so what I would always say is just to students, join the coalitions and I don't use the word coalition with them, but I would say join the organizations that you identify with. So if you really care passionately about the environment, join one of the environmental clubs on campus that is affiliated with a national organization and then become really involved in that and volunteer with them and work for them. You don't have to be a political party person at the beginning. And then that will help you evolve and figure out which party best fits your values. But then what I always tell them is eventually you need to pick a party if you want to be influential or run for office. So I was nonpartisan for years working at the Legislative Council Bureau, but when I went to run for office, I had to pick a party. There are people who run for office as nonpartisans, but it's very difficult to get elected. And then if you notice in the legislature this year, we don't even have anyone who's not a D or an R. So I think political power is still in the parties and we're still structured that way. So I encourage them to pick a party that most closely identifies with them, but I encourage them to be involved in the policy areas first. And then it will become clearer which party they should belong to, if that makes sense. But I always encourage them to join a club and or a national organization and start volunteering because that will open up a ton of doors and give you ideas of how to get more involved. And it can be everything from puppies and kittens, if that's what you love. If you love Lake Tahoe and skiing, join the environmental ones. If you care about healthcare issues because, your family didn't have sufficient healthcare, join those. And so I think pick a passion project, and that really does sort of set you forward on it.
That's wonderful. Julia, do you have anything to add?
I'm just going to promote the internship program that Amber's been running. Like, if you're really into it, sign up for the internship program. It just makes my heart smile that half of the legislature has interns now, because that definitely was not the case when I was there. And she is just doing phenomenal work. And it doesn't just come with the internship, it comes with all of the training that she's been talking about. And so for those college students who are really into it, an internship in the legislature, there's just nothing like it in terms of getting the direct experience.
Thank you. Yes. And we accept all majors. We love everybody from any major. It's in the political science department, but we really love the diversity of the legislature is where the whole world collides, right? Every topic you can think of is there. So all students are welcome to apply. Yeah. Every other year.
That's wonderful. We're coming up to the very end of our time. So are there any parting golden nuggets that you would like to depart on our attendees before we close out this webinar?
I would go with almost all the changes iterative. There are very, very, very few bills that come through the legislature that seek to solve the entirety of a problem in one bill or one session. And I think Amber alluded to that. And we're working primarily in the healthcare space or behavioral health policy. And you can do some smaller things that make a difference immediately. You can do some, what I call the starfish sort of things, right? Where it's that story about the kid who's walking down the beach and all of the starfish have been brushed up onto the beach, and there's a little girl and she's throwing them all back. She's throwing as many of them can back in the ocean, and somebody comes along and says, well, you're never going to save them all. And she says, but I saved that one. So there can be some bills that will make a difference for a small subpopulation or something along those lines. But if you're going to do meaningful policy and systems change, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so staying engaged session after session, being strategic about we move the needle here and then we move the needle here, and then cultivating that over multiple legislators. Because if you had one champion and that champion decides that it's too much, like both Amber and I did, that there are more than one legislator who understands the long-term strategy to really improve these systems. And so that's the thing that I would say is there's some small wins. You can do that in one session, but the big systems change takes dedication and it takes years.
Here to that. I would just say, I always encourage people, Julia alluded to this earlier, it's the people's house. You know, our tax dollars pay for that building and the legislators work for you. I would encourage you just to go in someday and sit and listen and watch and get more comfortable with it. It really is an issue of like, you may not have something urgent you want to work on right now, but then just go watch some hearings or watch them online on the webinars. And then find out, I can send you this information too. There are several public health and mental health days where the legislators learned a ton of information from experts like you all. And if you aren't already tied into groups that are doing those days, go down on those days and be, you know, it demystifies the process the more you're just down there observing and learning. And so I would encourage you to do that in all your free time, right? But thank you for being involved. I was going to say, I'm just so impressed that there's so many of you today. Thank you for being interested in this. Really, the legislature doesn't work unless we have specialists who understand these issues down there telling the stories. So thank you.
And the Behavioral Health Association of Nevada's Legislative Day is February 25th.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. Again, I will be posting this webinar recording on at NV Rural RBHC on that's the handle for the channel on YouTube. I'm also going to make sure that it goes out on our board's Facebook page. But thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. If any of our attendees have any other questions or ideas or thoughts, go ahead and email me and I can send them along to Julia and Amber. And I hope you all have a lovely afternoon and hope to see you around in session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.